Welcome to the Working Genius podcast, where we discuss anything and everything related to the 6 types of working genius and how it impacts your work and your life. I'm Pat Lencioni, your host today. This is a special edition. I'm joined by Beau Johnson. It's great to have you here. Tell everybody what this is about.
Well, Pat, in just a couple of days from when we're recording this and releasing this, your newest book is releasing. And I'll say more about this in a minute, but we were just thinking about, what if you were sitting with Pat at dinner, or you were stuck in an airport lounge or on an airplane with him, and you got to just talk about this experience of writing the book and all of that? We thought that would be so interesting, just to double click into some of that process and kind of some fun, interesting details. So we called this Beers with the Author, where we're just going to get to chat about the book.
Well, and you assured me that you would find it interesting. That's why I'm willing to do it. I wasn't like, I'm a fascinating guy. People would love to have beers with me. But I do find that people, when they find out I'm an author, they have a lot of questions. And I actually enjoy talking to people about it, because being an author is a lonely endeavor. And when people are interested in what goes on for the months and months that I go about writing it, I find that to be life-giving. So I actually enjoy telling people about this.
Well, the notion for me, you were one of my favorite authors for a long time. I think I cited you 10 times in my dissertation. And the idea of getting stuck next to you on a plane, I'd probably be like, oh, I don't want to annoy him or ask him questions about this. And then you saying that, oh no, I'd love to double click into some of that. We thought, let's just record this. And for anybody who's listening, on September 27, we're going to host a launch event for your newest book, where you're going to give the speech. We're going to do an interview afterwards, and I hope everybody is able to attend. You can, of course, find that on our website at workinggenius.com. But Pat, let's just jump in.
This is like a great conversation about stuff that I wouldn't cover during that talk.
And you don't know what questions I'm going to ask you, so I'll start with this one. I'm literally holding a book in my hand, and you've been public about the fact that your geniuses are invention and discernment, and your frustrations are enablement and tenacity. And yet I hold a finished, fully tenacity book in my hand. And I'm just curious for you about this writing process. I imagine the invention part is fun, but this thing got finished. Is the writing, is that fun for you? Is the whole process, do you enjoy that whole experience?
Okay, so the most fun part is the beginning, where I come up with the concept and get to think about it and flesh it out. And I will say this is really weird. And I wouldn't recommend this to everybody, but for me, it really helps. And that is, I actually design the cover of the book, which never makes it to the end process. It's never the final cover. But I actually need to see what the book is going to look like and what it's going to be called. I need that kind of context in order to write. And I love the beginning, when I'm talking about what is it about, what's it called, what's the subtitle going to be, and what am I really trying to convey. And so the beginning is really fun, and it probably gets less fun as I go, to be quite frank. I mean, it probably starts off really high, and I still love the process. So it's not like then it gets unfun, but the last 10% of it is painful for me. And if it weren't for people around me, like Tracy, my editor, and the other folks around me, they have to force me to finish.
So I didn't know that you literally have the cover in mind. Do you have a specific person in mind? I've heard authors before say they write to, Joe, or they write to their uncle. Do you have a specific person that you're writing to?
It's Tracy. She's my editor. And when I say I'm writing to her, it's she's got discernment. She knows what we do. So every night when I'm writing, if I'm a little nervous, I'm like going, ooh, I hope she likes this part. And frankly, much of the goodness that comes back to me from writing a book, people don't read it in real time. I mean, it's years. I'm having people give me feedback 20 years later after the 5 dysfunctions of a team. And that's wonderful. But half the time they're reminding me what's in the book, because I've forgotten, because it's been so long. So Tracy is the person that within 24 hours of me coming up with a new character or writing a chapter or coming up with a new concept, she's the one who says, that was great. And that is a huge part of my motivation.
That's so interesting. So you've written multiple books with Tracy in mind. Tell us about that. I hope this is interesting to more people than just me, but tell us about the actual process. Do you just write at home? Do you write in the evenings? Do you have a regular rhythm? Do you go somewhere? Do you write at coffee shops? Where do you actually do the work of writing?
Yeah, I love thinking about. I love to ask other authors how they do it too, and probably your working genius informs this,
Hmm.
as well as other things in your life. For me, the ideal thing is I can't be at the office because I'm too much of an extrovert and I enjoy being around other people too much. And I can't be at home because I like my family and it makes me want to go talk to them. So what I do is I find a place where I can go, like a hotel. I go to the Lafayette Park Hotel a lot, which is the hotel here in town. And I've been doing this for 20 years. I know people who've worked there for years and years. But the best place to go for me is if I can go to a hotel and sit in the lobby or in a conference room where there's other people kind of around a little bit, because I kind of like being able to be distracted just enough to look around and watch people talking to each other, and that
Hmm.
it kind of distracts the front of my brain and allows me to be more creative. I've written many books alone in a hotel room at night, and the fact that it's just so quiet and so no distractions is pretty difficult for me.
Hmm.
But I've had to power through and do that a few times. But I'll tell you what I'll do, Beau. I will take a break every 15 minutes and play one game of Spider Solitaire, or I'll call somebody and say, "Hey, how's it going?" Because I just can't power through and do it. Like, now, I should say there's sometimes I probably go for 90 minutes of writing. I just get lost and I look at the clock and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, it's 2 a.m."
Oh, that's cool. You're pretty human. We all remember that experience in college when you had a paper to write and all of a sudden your apartment got really clean. Like, you're getting distracted too, or you're having to buckle down and finish writing something. Okay, so you said, watching people talk, dialogue is really hard to write. If anybody's ever tried to actually write dialogue, it's really, really hard for me to write. But yet you've chosen to write these books as fables. And, one of the things I really love about the book is the dialogue. And especially for Working Genius, because it feels like through the dialogue, you're anticipating the audience's objections to Working Genius. It's like the characters are wrestling with, is this true? And could this be me? Do I only have two geniuses? And does this apply to everybody? But to make that sound conversational has to be so much more work than just putting it in a bullet point or like you're just telling them the truth form. Why do you choose to do that? Is that more fun for you?
Yeah, what's interesting? I took a screenwriting class in college my senior year, and I love movies. But we were kind of poorish growing up, and that wasn't really why my dad sent me to college, is to get a degree in screenwriting. And so I took a screenwriting class and a journalism class, and I loved it. I took them both pass fail, got A's. It was stupid. I should have not taken them pass fail. I love writing, and screenplays are mostly dialogue. You don't get to describe things that are going on. A novel, you can say, and the smell in the air of the lilacs reminded him of his. And in a movie, it's like he walked into the room and here's what he said. And so you have to bring out the story through dialogue. And I think because of that, that's my best thing. I think when people say I love the dialogue, that's my favorite thing to hear, because I love to write dialogue, and I love to write in a way that people say, that's exactly how people talk. I like realistic dialogue. And when I like movies, it's usually because there's really, really good dialogue. My books don't have a ton of extraneous descriptions of things. It's more about the interaction between people. And that's just kind of my bias.
Now, one of the things that you do describe in the book, which you should tell us a little bit about the plot of the book. I'm sorry I haven't asked you about that yet. But is this main character, Beau Brooks, and knowing you like I do, it seems like he's a little bit autobiographical. Is that true? Is Beau like somewhat based on you, like the way he holds his backpack, or you have these interesting little details about even little fun pranks they did at him? Like, that sounds like Pat. Is that true?
A lot of little details are autobiographical just because they're things I know about. So I can say, like, I joke around how I wear my backpack on my one shoulder and my kids make fun of me. And when I was a kid, people that wore their backpack on both shoulders looked like dorks. And now you're a dork if you don't do that. And so I like to put a little color in there so people go, oh, this guy has got some depth. As far as his personality goes, there's probably a little bit of that. The most important thing that's autobiographical is kind of what happens to him in general, and that he makes mistakes and gets frustrated and learns some things. So I'd say like it's an autobiographical, I don't know, arc. Is that what they call it? I don't know what an arc is exactly. People talk about that, but it's mostly just fiction. I love to make up interesting fictional characters and send them on an adventure. And here's the other thing about when I write, Beau, I don't know how the story is going to end when I start it. I really follow my nose. I don't lay out like, okay, and then this will probably happen, and then this is what will probably happen. I mean, literally, the last 3 chapters came about in my brain right after I finished the chapter before.
Okay, that's so interesting because as I'm reading through the book right now. In fact, I read an early copy and we were giving some feedback to you, and you probably took none of my feedback, which is fine. And now I'm reading the hardcover book, and I know that it's going to end well, but you really build the anticipation in the story of there's a real problem that Beau Brooks, the character, which I'd love for you to just describe what the problem is, but he's facing this dilemma. And I'm like, is this a solvable problem? Is everything going to turn out okay for this guy? Do you want to just tee up for us a little bit? Like, what's the problem that he is facing in this story?
Well, and there's a couple problems. And one of the things I learned, and I've written other books before, and Tracy and I've realized halfway through, it's like the stakes aren't high enough. Every movie, I like to talk about, every movie, I learned this someplace, that is about conflict. There's something going on, and it could be man versus man, like Rocky versus the other, man versus nature. It's a storm and he's got to survive, or the wolves in the wild, or man versus himself. He's a beautiful mind there. He's struggling with his own stuff. And the stakes have to be high in order for people to care. Because if it's a story about something like, I really don't care if this guy makes it or not, or this gal makes it or not, and it's not really that big of a deal, then it's hard to be interested. And in this book, he's struggling with his own, whether or not he's meant to be successful and happy at work. And it's his own mental health, if you will. And his wife, whose patient, is really frustrated that she and the family have made many sacrifices for him. And every time he's not happy, he feels really bad. Like, I am putting my family through this. I have to figure this out, or else this could be really bad for us. And so if there's no stakes, it's really hard to turn the page and want to find out what's going to happen. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And you feel in the story, because I've been there. You've been there where you're frustrated, but you're like, oh my gosh, the people that I care about, it's not just impacting me, it's impacting my family, and it's impacting this guy's team. That, in fact, one of the characters in the book talks about, hey, I might leave if these grumpies, these crankies can't get themselves worked out, which of course anybody who understands Working Genius knows. So much of Working Genius is understanding your frustrations. And I love that this story talks about the pain really honestly that Working Genius helps solve. It's really, really neat.
I'm a big believer that the best characters have to have flaws, and they have to be real. And even the difficult characters, and this book doesn't have any, like, in some of my books, I've had some really kind of tough, bad characters, if you will, but even they have to have redeeming qualities, because life isn't black and white. Life isn't easy. And this guy is not perfect. And he really puts some things in jeopardy and is rejected a little bit at times. And I want people to read it and go, yeah, I felt that way. And like when you just said that to me, Beau, you said, gosh, I could relate to that. I'm like, oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad I'm not the only one. And I'm so glad that what he experienced rings true.
There's so many people that I have heard that sentiment from previous books of yours. Like the fable is what really made it click. It really made me understand, and the way you're able to walk people through there. Okay, but so speaking of flaws, have you ever found a typo in your book? You've hit print, the publisher has sent it out, and you're at a Barnes & Noble or whatever, and you're like, oh, no, typo of you.
So like when this book came up, and by the way, by the time it comes out, I've read it, I mean, probably 50 times front to back. Because when I write, by the way, I cannot jump in where I picked up. I have to read from the beginning. Because like I will write for 2 days and then I'll set it aside for a week, because I've never written a book when I was a full-time author. I'm doing other things, my family, my business. And so then I'll go back, oh yeah, I haven't written in a week. I have to go back. I have to read it from the beginning to where I was to reset. And so literally by the time it's out, I've read it 50 times. I mean, Matt, our engineer, was on the content team who helped develop this. How many times did you read it before it came out, Matt?
Unfortunately, I have to start over when I jump back in. So I probably read it about 50 times as well. I'll probably never read it again.
Exactly.
That's amazing. How do you keep the versions straight in your head? Like, I mean, if you're starting from the beginning, but you've started from the beginning 40 times, how do you remember? Is that hard?
I don't say I rewrite it from the beginning.
No, but I'm saying even if you're rereading, if you just reread it Tuesday, is it hard to keep the different versions straight in your head of, did I have him say this or have him say that? And was she going to be...
For me, that's why I have to start over, because then I just read whatever version is current.
Yeah, that's exactly why I have to do that, because I will...
Yeah.
Go ahead, Matt. What were you saying?
Well, if I don't reread it, then that's the problem I run into, is like, oh, I don't remember if we clarified this, if we changed this yet, has Pat made an edit to this yet? And so every time I pick it back up, I have to start from the beginning. So by the end of the book, it becomes a little harder.
You know what's funny, Matt and Beau? When I go back and do that, every time I go from the beginning, not only am I rereading it, I'm re-editing it. Like, I add things every time I go through. And I can't tell you how many, hundreds and hundreds of times in writing my books, including this one, I'll edit something. Like, I'll be reading it. I'm on page 30 and I got to get to page 50 to keep writing. And I'll change something. And then in the next page, I'm like, oh, crap. I go back and I unchange it because I addressed the issue, because I'd forgotten about it. I'm like, oh, I addressed that in this part. So I have edited and unedited so many times because I forget what's coming next.
Okay, these are such random questions, but I've always wondered this. You know, we're reading Harry Potter as a family, and the names she chooses are really interesting. The names you chose in the book are really interesting. How do you choose how you're going to name your characters?
I'm very careful about that. I come up with them out of thin air, or I think about people I know, or the children of people I work with.
Okay.
So, but sometimes I'll go like, and I'll have a name, and Tracy and I will go, does that name really sound like that person? I don't think so. And it's not very systematic.
So you don't have a baby name book looking up definitions of names.
No.
You just kind of gut feel.
Yeah. And like, your kids have very interesting names. I'll have to use a few of those in the next book. But I do like to pick names. Sometimes I do it to honor a friend, you know.
Oh,
One
cool.
of my... I like the name Jamie for a man, because it's one of those interesting names that could be a girl or a guy. And one of my favorite friends growing up was named Jamie. And so I picked a character, Jamie. He happens to be like one of the meanest characters ever. I don't assign them based on the people, but I just pick the name. He's like, hey, I'm the bad character. Like, sorry.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you've written a bunch of books. You certainly didn't have to write another book. Right? Like, you could probably have enough speaking gigs talking about all the other books. You didn't have to go through all the work of this. Such a simple question. But I guess what I'm wondering is, why go through the pain of doing this whole process again, of writing another book? And maybe the other way to ask it, Pat, is like, what's your hope? What is your hope in releasing another book to the world like this?
Well, I think that, and in this case, in some ways, this maybe should be my best book, because I wrote it, you know, after the model came out and we'd already been using it. So we learned more. My other ones, I write the books when the model is out. And over the next year and a half, I'm like, oh, wow, had we known that, we'd have done that. So we got to go back into this book and make it even more complete, in the sense that we had been playing with that assessment and that model for a year and a half before the meat of this got written. But the reason why I actually like doing it, it's an interesting thing. It's like, is it painful? It's not painful. It's really hard. And I say that because it's hard to enjoy something. When you watch a golfer who's a great golfer, and I'm not saying I'm a great writer, I think I'm a good writer, but a great golfer, to do their best, they have to grind. And even though when they get to the tournament, they play well, you're like, wow, it's so easy for them. And it's like, yeah, they have natural ability, but then they grind on that ability to get to be the best they can be. So I love writing. But darn it, if I'm in the midst of it, I'm like, oh crap, I have to make this chapter better. It's kind of painful to go to rework it and like, and you know what's interesting? I would have thought that writing fiction, because I like it, would be easier than writing nonfiction. But it's kind of harder to have to make the characters make sense and the dialogue fit together. It's like, I prefer it, but it ends up being a lot more work. I don't know what a good analogy in life that would be to. So I love doing it. It's really painful in the midst of it, but I enjoy it. And again, kudos to Tracy for giving me immediate feedback. That poor woman, reads it so many times. But she says editing the book is the favorite part of her job.
Really? Yeah, that
Yeah, when I'm
sounds
like,
excruciating to me, but I'm
yeah.
grateful the people are doing it. And I'm grateful for this book, Pat. I'm 135 pages into reading it for the second time, really like the first time on a hardcover. I've been a fan of Working Genius, like many people listening, for a long, long time. And I just think it's going to help the model come to life for even more people.
I'll say something. The reason why we're doing this too is I've been on so many podcasts and people ask questions, and we want to make sure that the insider stuff, our people know about it. And I hope it's interesting. But one of my favorite things that people tell me, and I had somebody do this just the other day, they'll come up to me after a talk and they'll say, hey, I don't read a lot. Or a lot of times a woman will go, my husband hasn't read a book since college, and he reads your books. And I remember when I started writing these, I thought, I don't want anyone to be bored or to power through it, like to force them. I want them to be curious, and I want them to follow the story and enjoy it independent of what they're learning. And then at the end of it, go, oh, wow, I just learned a lot. And I didn't even know I was learning. I'd rather play basketball to exercise because it's just darn fun. And at the end, I go, that was a great workout, versus getting on a treadmill and like counting the minutes. So I don't want this to be work for people. I want people in a company to pass this out and people go, oh, good, this is going to be, 2 hours of fun, and it's going to benefit our organization, rather than, I can't believe they're making me read,
Pretty
So
fun.
that's one of my favorite things, is that even people that don't generally read a lot find these to be enjoyable.
Yeah, and the characters are interesting, and Jasper's funny in this book, which is, of course, another way of saying you're funny, that you're able to write in a funny way. I don't know how you do that. Anything else come into your mind, Pat, of questions other folks have asked you that you like thinking about, or maybe a question that you would ask an author that we non-authors haven't asked you?
Ooh, that's a great question. So I'll answer the first one, and while I'm doing that, I'll consider the second one. So the question people always ask is, how long does it take? And I'm never able to give a good answer, because like my favorite author is Dean Koontz. And I think he probably writes a book in about 3 months. But he's a full-time author, and he's disciplined, and he's brilliant. But for me, it's probably 9 months, because I don't write all at once. I'll go do a day of writing or a day and a half, and then I won't write for a week. And that's how ideas bubble up, and then I'll do this. So it's really difficult. So I think mine's like having a baby. I think it's about a 9-month process generally. But if I were a full-time author, if I were able to do that and had that discipline, it would probably be more like 3. Now, what would I ask an author? And that is, especially the ones that write so much. Like Dean Koontz is brilliant. I love telling people about this guy. Brilliant, deep, thoughtful guy. It's just, his books are just hopeful and scary, and there's always underlying meaning. It's my favorite thing to read his books, and I reread them, and he's a brilliant writer. If I were to ask him, I would just say, do you ever, how connected do you have to be with the underlying message? I could not, if somebody came to me and said, Pat, I want you to write a book about XYZ, and I weren't passionate about XYZ, I don't know how to do that. I went to a screenwriting conference years ago. I wrote a screenplay, and I submitted it to this organization, and they invited me to come work on it with other screenwriters and editors and directors. And one guy there would consider himself to be kind of a hack. And like literally a studio would go, we want you to do a movie. It's going to be about a dentist who abuses his patients. Write the script for us. And he would write it for them because he just loved writing. And I guess what I would ask an author is, can you write a book that you're not connected to the underlying meaning? Or do you? And I guess there's some people that just love the craft. I could not write a book that wasn't really connected to something I thought was really life-changing for others.
That feels really true about you. I know that it would really hurt for you if somebody were to say that you were kind of insincere, right?
Yeah, or if after they read it, they said, yeah, that was an interesting read, but it's not going to do anything for me. I mean, if I were a painter, and I think it's because I'm an idealist and because I'm an ID, if I were a painter, I wouldn't, if I painted a tree, it would have to be a tree that meant something to somebody, or from my backyard that I don't think I just want to paint for the sake of painting, or make a movie for the sake of making a movie, or writing a book for the sake of writing a book. That's not to say that people who love the craft, there's not a place for that. It just, I don't think I could do that.
Well, I'm pretty confident this book is going to be just another layer in this world of working genius that is helping so many people discover their gift and transform their team and discover their frustration. So I even love, Pat, I know we got to wrap this conversation up, but I love the plot of this story because you've woven together how a team and a church and a marriage are all answering the question, okay, I have this insight, now what? And you're taking us on that journey of getting to discover that. So all of you, go out and buy the book and give one to a friend. I really think it has so much potential and power to be able to make a difference in people's lives. And I hope everybody will join us on September 27 for this launch event, where we're going to get to hear from you about your newest Working Genius speech and have a conversation afterwards about the book. Anything else, Pat, from you?
No, thanks for, I hope it's been interesting to people. Thanks for suggesting we do it, Beau. And I appreciate the questions and your passion and everything else. And thanks, Matt, for making these work and for all your help on this.
All right. God bless everybody. Thanks, Pat.
Bye-bye. God bless.